Hi everyone, my name is Gracie Francisco and I'm a program manager for 10,000 Degrees. 10,000 Degrees is a college access and success program located in the San Francisco Bay Area. And I specifically work with students on the K through 12 side in our access program, helping students navigate their pathway to college. And a huge piece of that, as you can imagine, is related to financial aid. So I'm here today to talk to you a little bit about financial aid and how you can best support students through financial aid, especially while we're virtual this year. So I have a list of frequently asked questions that I am going to be running through to share information with you directly. Some of these questions did come directly from those of you who are watching, if you're an educator at one of our partner schools, and some of these questions are just questions that we hear on a regular basis. So I'm going to go ahead and jump right in. I also want to share that we do have other resources available on our YouTube page, both for educators and for students. A lot of these resources for students are available in English and Spanish, and we are going to be adding to this resource page on YouTube throughout the course of this financial aid season. So the first question that we often get asked is, why should I fill out a FAFSA or a DREAM Act application if my family is not considered low income? It's a great question, and there's a couple reasons. So first of all, you never know when there's going to be a change of circumstances. We are in a situation right now, it's a great example. Nobody predicted this pandemic coming and the effect that it would have on the economy, and a lot of folks have lost jobs or have lowered income because of the pandemic. So you never know. There are going to be folks that qualify for financial aid this year, like the Pell Grant, and they may not have qualified in the past. So that's one reason. Another reason is that some scholarships require it. So I can't give you like a list of scholarships that do and don't require it, but there are scholarships out there that require a FAFSA in order to submit the scholarship application. And the other thing is that if you submit a FAFSA or a DREAM Act and maybe you're not eligible for the Pell Grant or the Cal Grant, you can qualify for lower interest loans than if you were to apply at a private bank. So those are some good reasons to share. Mostly we get this question from parents, so those are some good answers to share with parents if they're questioning why they should fill out an application. I always tell people there's no harm in filling out an application. You're never going to have to pay more money to a school just because you have the means. It's obviously capped at the tuition and fees and room and board rate. So it's not like they're going to ask you to pay more money based on your financial situation. The second question that we get asked a lot is, how do I enter colleges on the actual applications if I'm applying to more than 10 schools? This is another great question. So essentially what the student has to do is they add their 10 schools. I always recommend for California students that their first school is a California school so that it triggers the California DREAM Act if they're eligible for that. So if they have more than 10 schools, they enter their 10, they go through and submit their application. And once they've been notified that the application has been processed, they can go back into the application and delete some of the schools and then add in the rest of the schools on their list. Just one thing to keep in mind is if the student makes financial changes on their application, they will have to go back and re-add those initial schools and submit, and then submit again. So for students who are applying to more than 10 schools, it is helpful to get the financial information right the first time. Another question we often get from educators is, how do I support a student who is undocumented or maybe undocumented? One thing that's so important in this space in particular is language. We never, ever, ever want to ask a student about their documentation status. That's not our business. What I do to figure out which application the student is filling out is I explain the two applications and the differences and requirements for each application. And then I say, okay, based on that information, do you know which application you'll be filling out? And the student will oftentimes indicate, okay, I'm filling out the FAFSA, or I'm going to fill out the DREAM Act. So you don't need to ask a student what their documentation status is. And if a student does decide to share that with you, that is sacred information and is not to be shared with anybody else. Even if you're trying to get support for that student, you can say, I have a student who's filling out the DREAM Act, or I have a student who's filling out the FAFSA, but you never actually want to talk about their status. If a student trusts you with that, like I said, that is an incredible privilege, and we want to treat it as such. So the qualifications for the California DREAM Act. This is for students who don't have a social security number. If you're working with older students who have DACA, they would be eligible for the California DREAM Act. Our high school students don't qualify because of the year limitations. They don't qualify for DACA, but if they don't have a social, they can still fill out the California DREAM Act. There's also a list of questions at the beginning of the application to make sure the student is eligible. So make sure that they or you read carefully when guiding the student through the beginning of the application, and that will help them determine their eligibility. The other thing to keep in mind is that in order for a student to apply to the California DREAM Act, they need to have attended school in California for at least 3 years during their K-12 education. It doesn't have to be 3 consecutive years, but they do need to be graduating from a California high school and planning to enroll at a college in California in order to be eligible for the in-state tuition as well as the Cal Grant if they meet the GPA requirements for that. It's really important to remember that if a student is filling out the DREAM Act, they are only going to qualify for state aid, and this is specific money to California. So if the student wants to go to school out of state, they cannot take their DREAM Act money, their Cal Grant money, and use it out of state. It has to be used in the state of California. So those are a couple good questions about the DREAM Act. We are going to be doing a line by line of the DREAM Act, a translation that will be available on our YouTube page for students to use as they're navigating the application, because oftentimes a lot of the questions that we get are, can you translate this, or what does this mean? And so we're going to go ahead and put that on our YouTube channel that you can share that, then you can share that with students. Another question we often get about the DREAM Act specifically is, how do I support a newcomer student who hasn't been in California for 3 years, or they don't meet that 3-year eligibility mark? There are a couple different things to do. You can encourage the student to dual enroll at one of the community colleges. The challenge with this is that we're already into the semester. So if they're only 1 semester shy, then having them dual enroll for next semester, that would be great. Then they could, meet the qualification that way, or they can take classes at the community college after they graduate from high school. They will have to pay, well, it depends on the college where you're at. So you have to talk to your local community college to see what the resources are for students who are working towards their AB 540 or DREAM Act criteria. Another question that we received from one of our school partners is, what are unusual situations that come up often? So I actually wouldn't even necessarily call them unusual, because they do have to happen so often. But one of the biggest ones is divorced or separated parents. So a lot of times the question is, whose information, like whose financial information do we need? And basically the rule of thumb is whoever provides 51% or more of the student's financial support is the parent whose information needs to be included on the financial aid application. Sometimes folks will say, well, we have 50-50 custody, but it's really about who's providing more of their financial support. Typically, it's the parent that the student lives with most often, but not always. So make sure you explain it using the terms of whoever provides the most financial support. The other thing to know about parents who are divorced, if the parent whose financial information they are using got remarried after the divorce, they will need to provide financial information of the new partner. So that's something that people don't always expect, and a good thing to keep in mind. Another question that we get often, like a situation that comes up often, is when the student has a social security number but the parent does not, which application do they fill out? And in this case, they would fill out the FAFSA, and the student will create an FSA ID, which I'll talk about here in a minute. The FSA ID is basically the username and password that is used to electronically sign the application. So the student will create an FSA ID, but the parent will not. And in the application where it asks for the parent's social security number, the student will enter all zeros in that social security box. And then when they're reviewing their application, it might prompt them that something is wrong with the application. It's not actually what it says if the student reads the warning message, but a lot of times they just see the red text and they freak out. So if you have two parents with no socials, the message is going to come up twice. That doesn't mean that they're doing anything wrong. They're just saying, are you sure this information is correct? And you're saying, yes, I'm sure this information is correct. And so then when they get to the end of the application, it's really important that they print out the parent signature page so that the parent, one of the parents, can sign on paper, and then the student needs to mail that signature page to London, Kentucky, which is all the information is on the signature page. The thing that's tricky about this right now with distance learning is a lot of students don't have printers at home. So they may need to save this form as a PDF and email it to their counselor or email it to themselves and go to school where they can print it out. I know not all schools are open, but some counselors and stuff are on campus. So keep an eye out for emails like that. It would also be really helpful. This is a best practice that we do at 10,000 Degrees, but we always have stamped envelopes with us during financial aid season so that that's not, you know, one more barrier for students mailing their forms. It's really important that once they print the signature page, they press submit application, because if the signature arrives in Kentucky at FAFSA and there's no application to match it with, they'll send the signature page back, and it creates this like back and forth. It can be several weeks long. So really important that they press submit so that when the signature arrives, there's something to link it to in the FAFSA system. We're going to transition to talking about FSA IDs. I know there's a lot of questions that have come up about FSA IDs, and I will say from our experience working with students on the high school and college side, one of the biggest things that we spend time on is trying to recover accounts, because people don't write down their username and password information. A lot of times they don't write down their security questions either, and then they forget. So really important to keep that information in a safe but accessible place, because you will need to revisit it or might need to revisit it every year when you're filling out the application. Only one parent, if the parent has a social security number, only one parent needs to create an FSA ID to sign the application. If they have other children in college, the parent will only have one FSA ID for all of their children, and each student will have their own FSA ID. One of the common challenges we see when folks are having a hard time creating that FSA ID or having the signature be verified is that the information in the actual FAFSA application doesn't match with the information that was provided in the FSA. So it could be like the name is misspelled, or maybe they included one last name on the application and two last names on the FSA ID. Could be the birthday is off by, you know, 1 year or 1 day or whatever, a month, or the social security number is off even by one number. So if any of those things, if you're running into issues with the FSA ID not matching, there's a good chance that it's one of those things, and you can go back and edit that information in whichever application has, or whichever platform has the wrong information, whether it's the FAFSA or the FSA ID. Another tip is please encourage students to use a personal email when they're creating the FSA ID. A lot of students right now are used to using their school emails for everything, but when they graduate from high school, those school emails are going to be deactivated. So it's really important that they use an email that they will have access to after high school graduation. And then the other important thing to know is that each FSA ID needs to be linked to a separate email account. So if parents don't have an email account, this is common. The student can work with their parent to either create an email account specifically for like school related purposes on Gmail or whatever platform, or if the student has two emails, like let's say they have two personal emails for some reason, they can, you know, link it to one of their second email, their secondary email, but each FSA ID has to be affiliated with a different email account. All right. Moving on, the next thing I want to talk about is selective service. So in order to receive aid, students who identify as male on their application, whether it's the DREAM Act or the FAFSA, need to register for selective service in order to be eligible for aid. The thing that's tricky is that on the FAFSA, it'll ask, are you registered? Most students will say no, and then it will say, do you want us to register you? And then they need to say yes. On the DREAM Act, this does not get triggered the same way. And so the student actually needs to fill out a paper form, a paper selective service form, and mail it. The challenges, they used to be available at the post office. They are not anymore, is my understanding. So you can print out the selective service forms and have them available, but we're at home and a lot of people don't have printers. So what I am doing personally is I'm putting together selective service packets where I'm printing out the form. It's just a blank form. It's the same for everyone. And then I'm putting it in like a large envelope that I can mail to a student's home. So it'll have the form and a pre-stamped envelope that they can then mail the form in to try and remove some of those barriers since we're not in person right now. So if you're working at a school site, that might be something that you do, like have it available in the main office or something like that. So a student can stop by and just say, hey, I need a selective service packet, or you can mail it out to them. It's really important that they do complete that process though, and then hang on to their, when they actually get the confirmation that they've been registered, they need to hold on to that. So that is a common challenge that we see specifically for our students who are filling out the DREAM Act. Another common question that we got this season specifically is obviously around COVID. What do we do if there was a change of income because of COVID? So you're still going to use the 2019 tax information to fill out the application. However, once your student has submitted their financial aid application and their college applications, they're going to need to go through an appeal process. So the appeal process is slightly different with each school, but I would suggest the students having kind of like a draft of an email or a letter ready that basically just explains, you know, my parents' income was this in 2019. Because of COVID, my ex-parent lost a job or their hours were lowered, so their income was lowered. This is our income for 2020. So you'll probably wait until like the end of the year, but you can say like, this is the amount that was earned in 2020. And then the school will either send you a form that you fill out or, continue the conversation, but it does need to be done for every school that the student applied to. So that's really important to keep in mind if you had a change of income in any situation, but this year I think it will be more common because of COVID. The last couple things I want to say is, working through the financial aid applications can be really overwhelming, especially if you're trying to serve multiple students with different situations. And so if you're, not sure what to do, there's a lot of helpful hints within each application. Google is also a great tool if you're not sure. And if you're really stuck or you're not feeling confident in the support that you're able to provide, please refer to, if your student is going to one of our local community colleges, refer to their financial aid office. If your student attends a school where 10,000 Degrees has programming, you can refer to any of our staff. We're at every public high school in Marin County. We are at several high schools in Santa Rosa City Schools, Healdsburg, Sonoma Valley, Petaluma. So if you have a student that attends one of those schools, definitely reach out to our staff. We also have programming in San Francisco, Richmond, Napa, the South Bay now. So we're kind of all over the place. And you can check out our website to see if there is a staff person with our program that works at your school. The last thing I want to address is what happens after you submit the application. So a lot of times folks are concerned, like, I'm giving you all my financial information, where is it going? So because of FERPA, the information that you provide in these applications is protected. And so what happens is you submit your application and they send the application to all of the different schools that you listed there. So all those colleges that we talked about earlier, they send the information there, and then the schools receive it and they look at, what information was provided, and they put together a financial aid package that is specific to your student, that basically details like what kind of aid they will receive from the school. They typically send those out in the spring. They can come anywhere from like February until April, sometimes even after, but students do need to make their decision of where they're attending college by May 1st, and so most colleges try to get out a financial aid award letter prior to May 1st so the student can make an informed decision. It's super, super important that your student is checking their email regularly, because once they submit their college applications and their financial aid applications, the schools might have additional questions for them, and so it'll be, they'll either receive an email or they'll receive a message through their portal that they have to create once they submit their college application. So it's really important that your student is dedicating time at least once a week to check all their portals, check their email, because those deadlines do come up really quickly, and sometimes students' financial aid could be in jeopardy, or even their admission sometimes can be in jeopardy if they don't respond back with the requested information. So really, really important that they are on top of that, and that they advocate for themselves throughout this process if they have questions. And then lastly, once your student submits the financial aid application, either the FAFSA or the DREAM Act, they need to create a Web Grants for Students account in California. So Web Grants for Students is administered, or it's run by the California Student Aid Commission. These are the folks that administer the Cal Grant. So this is where students will verify that they've graduated from high school. So that lets CSAC know that they can disperse aid to the college. The student can also put their Cal Grant on hold for any reason, like if they're taking a leave of absence from school, or they want to start a community college and they want to save their Cal Grant for when they transfer. There's a number of reasons. And then they can also see what kind of aid they're receiving from CSAC on this portal. So they receive an email as well as a letter in the mail, letting them know that their Web Grants for Students account has either been created or needs to be created, and then they can create a login username and password to manage that account. So if you haven't picked up on this yet, there are a lot of accounts that students need to be managing during this whole process. Their portals, their financial aid applications, the Web Grants for Students, all of these different things. So it's really important that students keep their various usernames and passwords and security questions in a secure but accessible place, so that they can refer back to it, because they'll need to be referring back to it for the next however many years they're in college. All right, those were the basic Q&A questions that I received. So we'll go ahead and send this out, and then stay tuned for more information coming from us regarding the translated applications for FAFSA and DREAM Act, if you want to share that with your Spanish speakers. And then we also have helpful videos that we're posting on our YouTube page to help students through the application process. Alrighty, thanks for your support, and thank you for all you do to support students, especially during virtual learning. We really appreciate it. We recognize it's challenging, but it makes a difference, so thank you.